The sky above the smoking sea was the color of old bruises, layered purples and ash-blurred gold, and Drogon cut through it like a black spear. Heat rolled up from the shattered ring of islands below, tasting of brimstone and metal, and the wind tore at Daenerys' hair, dragging silver strands free of their braids to whip her face. She leaned forward, fingers curled into the pebbled warmth between Drogon's neck spines. "Soves," she murmured in High Valyrian, the word nearly lost to the rush of air. "Fly." He answered with a deep, pleased rumble that she felt through her thighs and ribs more than she heard, then banked so sharply the world seemed to tilt. The newborn peninsula spread beneath them, a crescent of fused black cliffs and glass-smooth shores, where once the ruins of Valyria had lain drowned and broken. The outlines of a city shimmered through the haze. Unfinished walls, half-built towers, countless scaffolds clawing at the sky, a place still more promised than stone, but hers. New Valyria. Drogon's shadow skimmed over the outer harbors, over dockyards choked with masts and cranes. Men like ants hauled stones, rolled barrels, turned capstans. The fire-warped skeletons of ancient Valyrian piers were wrapped in new timber and iron, lashed to fresh-cut rock quarried from safer coasts, dragged here by ship and slave-free hand. Her city hummed, roared, panted. It breathed with every hammer blow and shout. It was not the gleaming marble and pale gold of the songs. Not yet, maybe never. Let the songs sing of what was, she thought. I will build what must be. Drogon dipped lower without asking, circling the largest of the vents, a cracked maw in the earth that exhaled a constant plume of smoke. The air grew hotter, thick with the tang of sulfur and something older, a deep metallic scent that reminded her of blood and coins and rain. The vent had once been only a wound among many in this cursed archipelago, one more place where the fire in the earth spat contempt at the sky. Now its edges were tamed by ring walls of black stone, ramparts with walkways and watch posts. Stairs spiraled down along its inner lip to platforms where her smiths labored. Even at this height, she could see the forge fires blazing brighter than any she'd known in Meereen. This was where the dragon forges lived, the great heart of her city, pulsing in iron and obsidian and steel. The heat rising from them kissed Drogon's scales and made them shine like oiled coal. Below, someone on the highest walkway pointed, shading their face with an arm. Others followed, faces turned up, hands raised. To some, she would forever be a dream dragged down into flesh. To others, a sovereign whose laws had teeth. To all, she was a shape in the sky that blotted out the sun. Mother of dragons, Queen of New Valyria, Breaker of chains. The titles sat heavy and familiar, like the rings braided into her hair. They did not chafe as they once had. They were things she had chosen and things that had been thrust upon her. And she had learned there wasn't as much difference between the two as she had believed when she was a girl chasing a star across the Dothraki Sea. Once, she had dreamed of Westeros the way a starving child dreams of bread. Vague, soft, golden at the edges. Now she dreamed in black stone and red fire. "Lanta," she said, patting Drogon's neck. "Down." He answered with a blast of hot breath and folded his wings slightly, angling toward the upper tiers of the city. New Valyria's highest quarter clung to a steep slope of fused rock overlooking the forges and the sea. Its streets were a web of terraces and switchbacks and broad stairways carved directly into cooled lava. Gleaming obsidian tiles sparkled underfoot here and there, where her builders had been bold or fanciful, but most of the city's bones remained raw, dark stone. A few proud towers already stood finished, domes and spires that caught the fading sun, their surfaces fussed over with dragon motifs. Between them spread scaffolds, cranes in completion. Her palace rose at the city's crown not as a single keep, but a cluster of halls, bridges, and open courts, spine-like along the cliff's edge. Dragons needed space and air. So did she. Their roosts were carved out of the rock face itself, great alcoves where beasts big as ships could cling and launch. One such ledge jutted from the palace flank like an enormous step. Drogon landed there in a cascade of dislodged dust and pebbles, the impact juddering through her bones. Guards were already waiting, unsullied in black, their polished helms turned up, spears grounded. The one who stepped forward wore a narrow steel gorget chased with a tiny sigil of a dragon's head, the mark of a captain. "Your Grace," he said, when she slid down from Drogon's side. His Giscari accent had softened over these years, worn away by Valyrian and trade tongue. "The council has assembled as you commanded. They await you in the High Hall. Has everyone come?" Daenerys asked, even as her hand lingered on Drogon's flank. His sides heaved, steam curling up with each breath. "Lord Tyrion arrived from the lower city an hour past, Your Grace," the captain replied. "The Archon of Builders, the Dragonforge Master, the Old Blood Delegate, the Braavosi Envoy, the Voice of Noth, the High Flamekeeper, and Grey Worm, in the barracks, Queen. He reports the last cohort from Volantis is expected by nightfall. There was some trouble at sea. There is always trouble at sea, in war or peace. He will join us when he can." She stepped back from Drogon at last, resting her hand briefly on his jaw, scratching the leathery skin where she knew he liked it. "Jirelagon, Drogon, fly." He huffed, tilted his head toward her, and for a moment his burning red-gold eyes caught hers. Something passed between them that was not quite thought and not speech. A flicker of emotion, shared hunger, shared wariness. He smelled of smoke and meat and sky. Then he launched, ate himself from the ledge in a roar and a rush of wings, plunging down and away over the city. Daenerys's cloak snapped around her ankles in his wake. The wind left behind smelled of stone dust and the faint tang of the sea. She turned toward the palace doors, their surfaces still rough in places where artisans had only just begun to carve dragons rearing and entwined. The Unsullied fell in around her, boot heels ringing on black stone. Inside, the air cooled. Not much, this was Valyria, but enough. Light slanted in through high, narrow windows that looked west toward the waters, painting the corridor walls in stripes of molten gold. Bare rock and scaffolding alternated with finished reliefs. Serpentine dragons writhing through stylized flames, Valyrian glyphs in sharp, clean lines that Missandei had insisted be carved by free hands, not chains. "You will confuse your grandchildren if you keep half the glyphs Giscari and half High Valyrian, Missandei," Daenerys had told her once in jest. "Then your grandchildren will learn 2 scripts instead of 1, Your Grace," Missandei had replied with a small smile. The thought of grandchildren still startled her when it stole in, even now, years after the hot chaos of Meereen. There had been no children of her body yet, and perhaps there never would be. But there were children who ran these streets, who chased one another beneath the half-built towers and shouted her name in 3 languages. She had seen one boy on the lower terraces just yesterday, barefoot and grinning, a wooden dragon on a stick clutched in one fist as he jumped over a puddle of cooling slag. "We rebuilt more than walls," she reminded herself. "We rebuilt lives." At the doors to the High Hall, the Unsullied peeled away. 2 great stone panels, each carved with a 3-headed dragon, still unpainted, stood a little ajar. The murmurs within leaked out, voices layered, rising and falling, the cadence of argument. A guard standing to one side banged the butt of his spear twice on the floor. "Her Grace, Daenerys of House Targaryen," he called in clear Valyrian. "Stormborn, Queen of New Valyria, Khaleesi of the Great Grass Sea, Breaker of Chains, Mother of Dragons." Titles, she thought again, feeling them ripple through the hall ahead of her. Let them remind them who I am and what I have done. Let them remind me. She stepped inside. The High Hall was still somewhat raw, even after these years of work. Its roof arched overhead, supported by ribbed vaults that met in carved dragon claws. Openings high along the east wall let in strips of burning light, illuminating moats of dust and smoke. The floor was a circular mosaic of black and red stone, still incomplete toward the northern edge where workmen had left their tools neatly stacked. A long, curved table of polished obsidian dominated the center, shaped vaguely like a crescent of land surrounded by stylized waves. Around it sat or stood the people who made her city move. Tyrion Lannister was perched on a cushioned stool near where her chair waited at the apex, a flagon of summer wine within easy reach, though his cup remained untouched. He had grown thinner over these years. The lines around his eyes had deepened, and the gold in his hair had faded further toward white. Scars remained where the Battle of the Blackwater and later disasters had carved their names into him. Yet his eyes, mismatched green and black flecked with amber, were as sharp and appraising as ever, even as he fanned himself with a folded parchment to push back the oppressive heat. He rose when she entered, as did the others, though some more slowly than others. "Your Grace," he said, bowing with a flourish that was only slightly mocking. "You have been flying again. I envy Drogon. He at least has the luxury of a breeze." "There is a breeze here," Daenerys said. "You just hide from it in shadowed halls." He looked meaningfully up at the high windows. "Shade is one of the few luxuries of my station that does not come with added responsibility. I cling to it as best I can." His mouth quirked. "You were gone longer than planned, my queen. I had begun to suspect you'd flown off to find some yet unknown corner of the world to conquer. Only the western winds tried to lure me," she said mildly. "I ignored them. If he heard what sat beneath that, he did not show it yet." His gaze flicked past her, taking silent note of Drogon's absence, of her guards' positions, of the new cracks in the stone where a dragon's landing had knocked something loose. Tyrion did not miss much. "Please be welcome," she said to the others, taking her own seat. It was a simple thing compared with the iron throne she had once imagined. A carved chair of black stone with a high back, softened with cushions. A dragon's skull, smaller than Valyrian's had been, larger than any beast known in this age, hung newly set in iron above and behind it, its horns sweeping outward in stark silhouette. Around the table, chairs scraped and cloth rustled as her council reclaimed their places. To her left, Missandei sat straight-backed, a slate tablet before her, stylus poised. Her hair was worn longer now, coiled and bound with small silver rings. Her eyes had the calm focus of one who had seen chaos from its center and survived it. She wore a simple gown dyed a deep sea blue, the color favored by Nathi acolytes, though she had long since ceased to belong to any god but her own conscience. Beside her, Grey Worm stood rather than sat, as he always did in such councils unless she explicitly ordered otherwise. His armor was lighter than in the days of war, a sleeveless leather cuirass over which a breastplate bearing her three-headed dragon had been strapped. He had aged into his scar, and there was something slightly different in the set of his mouth these days. Less the hard line of a soldier expecting a blow, more the measured stillness of a man allowed to think beyond his own survival. On Daenerys's right, Master Mazdan of Meereen, once a modest coppersmith, now the Archon of Builders, leaned forward with ink-stained fingers steepled over his stomach. He smelled faintly of sweat and resin. At his elbow, a scroll case lay open, blueprints and drafts peeking out in a forest of curling parchment. Opposite him sat Orion Bellarese, representative of the surviving Old Blood families. His hair was the same shade of pale as Daenerys's, but cut short and severe. He wore it without braids or rings, as if to declare that his heritage needed no adornment. His eyes were a flat, chill lilac. The robe draped about his shoulders was rich but austere, dove-gray silk, embroidered at the cuffs with faint dragon motifs in silver thread. Farther down, the Braavosi envoy, Magister Tormo Saladar, mopped his forehead with a handkerchief and tried not to look impressed by anything. His dark beard was oiled to a point, and his vest was striped in blue and gold, the colors of some guild or another. At the table's far end, wrapped in crimson and orange robes, the high flamekeeper of the 12 Fires stood with hands tucked into his voluminous sleeves. His shaved head gleamed with sweat. A slender iron circlet rested on his brow, crowned with a ring of tiny rubies that glimmered like coals in the light. He had taken the fires of Valyria into his faith and given her people a new order of priests to manage the danger of the vents and listen to, or claim to listen to, the whispers in the flames. Others were present. Spice traders from Karth petitioning for privileges, a Volantene freedman elected as voice of the chainless, but they waited closer to the walls, away from the immediate curve of the council. "Tell me," Daenerys said, letting her palm rest lightly on the glass-smooth obsidian before her, feeling its faint, cool tremor from the forges deep below. "What quarrel have you all decided to have for my benefit today?" A few uneasy chuckles rippled around the hall. Tyrion cleared his throat. "We were merely discussing priorities, Your Grace." "That is another way of saying quarrel," she said. "Archon Mazden, begin." Mazden dipped his head. His coppery skin sheened with more than heat. "Your Grace, we are at the limits of what we can build with the resources we have. The dragon forges require more laborers to meet the quotas you have asked for, and the outer wards of the city lack sufficient cisterns. If we do not expand the aqueducts before the next dry season, we will see sickness, perhaps even riots." "Your forges drink water too, Archon," Orien Bellarys interjected smoothly. "It is not only the poor who thirst." "The poor number 10 for each one of you, Lord," Mazden replied, bristling. "If the cisterns run dry, no silk robe will keep your tongue from cracking." Orien's narrow mouth tightened. "We honor the Queen's laws as we have agreed," he said. "We accept that slavery is no more, that the old ways are gone." A faint emphasis nipped at those words, "gone." "But you would let the heart of our strength, the forges, grow weak. We must restore them to their former glory if New Valyria is to stand. The dragon forges are the soul of this city. They need fuel, water, ore, and skilled hands, not lectures about cisterns." "Common cisterns," Missandei said quietly, "are also a promise that the Queen's justice means her people need not die of thirst so that Dragonfire burns brighter." Bellarys' gaze slid to her and back to Daenerys. "With respect to your translator." "She is more than my translator," Daenerys said. "You will remember that, Orien." Bellarys inclined his head minutely, an apology that tasted like ash. Grey Worm stepped forward, the rings on his harness catching the light. "We must also speak of the riots at the Coppersmith's Quarter, my queen," he said. "If we move more laborers to the forges, we leave fewer to build homes. The people burn in their beds. They call the city the oven now. The name spreads. People love to rename the places that hurt them," Tyrion said dryly. "Once they called this land the Freehold." Daenerys let their words wash over her, feeling the currents beneath. Homes, water, forges, pride. How many times had she sat in such councils in Meereen? Different walls, different faces, the same three-headed beast of need. Justice, bread, order. Except now there was the weight of a name 400 years dead pressing against her back, urging her onward, urging her to fill the shape of a lost empire with her own flesh. "We will not choose between the forges and the people," she said. "We will have both. The question is how." Mazden opened his scrolls, hands trembling with eagerness. "Your Grace, if we divert half the workers from the North Quarries to the aqueduct crews, and if the Braavosi guilds will accept a delay in the construction of their counting house." The Braavosi envoy sputtered. "Delay? We bargained for..." Tyrion raised a hand, his tone mild. "If you wish your counting house to be full of men too thirsty to stand, you're welcome to keep the schedule as it is, Magister Saladar. But coins are lighter than corpses, and corpses do not spend. Perhaps a compromise." Daenerys let them argue out the particulars for a time, intervening where the debate threatened to spin in useless circles. She had learned, painfully, that she did not need to crush every disagreement herself. Sometimes letting the quarrel breathe for a few breaths produced better answers than commanding silence. Still, the heat in the hall pressed in, and the drone of voices pulsed in her skull in time with the distant thrum of the forges. The skull above her chair seemed to watch, its empty eye sockets deep in shadow. When Mazden and Saladar finally came to an agreement that did not leave everyone but them scowling, she shifted the talk. "Volantis," she said. "Grey Worm, you mentioned trouble." He straightened. "Yes, my queen. The last cohort of freedmen volunteers left 2 months ago. They were delayed when old blood factions in Volantis roused mobs against them. They call our people Ashborn, and say that any who go to New Valyria go to be eaten by dragons. There were riots at the harbor, fire, some ships burned. We lost stores. How many dead? Daenerys asked softly. 42 on our side, Grey Worm said. 3 of them officers I trained myself. His jaw clenched briefly, making the scar at his cheek pucker. Many more Volantines. The Red Priests there sided with us, but the Volantine Triarchs turned a blind eye. And you did not burn their fleets for it, Tyrion said. I am gratified that someone listens when I say restraint will serve us better than vengeance. Grey Worm's eyes flickered briefly toward him. Daenerys knew the bond between them had never been easy. The Hand had once counseled her to crucify fewer men. The commander of the Unsullied had lived his life being commanded, not questioned. They had learned each other's shapes, but trust between such different pieces took time. We did not burn their fleets, Grey Worm said. Yet, but our people are afraid to sail from Volantis. They fear knives in the water and fire on the docks. They ask why they die so that New Valyria may rise. Because we asked them to, Daenerys said, sheathing the words in iron. Because we promised them a place where they would not be chains again. I will not let Volantis turn their fear into truth. She looked to Bellarys. What say the old blood of this? Orion's chin tilted a fraction. Volantis has always been proud, he said. They dream themselves heirs to the freehold. They see your claim as a threat to their own vanity. They will not bend easily. Then they should remember what happened when last the freehold broke. Missandei murmured, and Daenerys heard in her voice the crackle of burning pyramids, the thunder of dragons above slave cities. We will remind them, Daenerys said. Tyrion, he lifted his brows. Do you prefer I remind them with ink or with steel, your grace? Ink first, she said. Steel last. They need our trade as much as we need their grain and timber. See that letters are dispatched to whatever Triarch still remembers that burned docks do not feed a city. Offer what terms you must that do not stain us. Mazdan, Grey Worm, you will bring me a plan by tomorrow's end for securing embassies and dock rights that do not rely on the charity of men who fear us. Mazdan nodded fervently. Grey Worm simply said, Yes, my queen. And Volantis, she continued, will receive more than letters. Orion, the old blood of New Valyria, will send a delegation of its own. Representatives of the families who chose to swear fealty. Braavos hears our voice already through Magister Saladar. Let Volantis hear yours. They covet old stories. Give them new ones. Tell them what we are building is not a copy of the freehold that died, but something that will not need chains to stand. Orion's lips parted, surprise breaking through his composure. You would have me speak for you to those Triarchs? Yes, she said. Or do you only want to be my noble when it keeps you here where it's safe and hot? A faint line of color stole into his cheeks. I will go where you command, my queen. Good. She leaned back slightly, letting her gaze sweep the room. We are not the freehold reborn. We are something the world has not seen. They will fear us regardless. Let them also see that we keep our word. The High Flamekeeper shifted, his rubies catching light like baring teeth. The flames agree, your grace, he said smoothly. They show me ships moving on troubled water, but a dragon's shadow over them brings harmony. Tyrion took up his wine at last and sipped. Isn't it convenient how often the flames see what we were going to do anyway? The priest's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. Perhaps you have learned to listen better. I am listening, Tyrion said. That is why I drink. Daenerys could feel the council starting to fray. The immediate matters were decided. For now, they always rose again, like corpses pulled from the sea. But beneath them ran a deeper current. She could sense it in Tyrion's sideways glances, in Missandei's careful stillness, in the slight tightness at the corners of Grey Worm's eyes. They are waiting, for me or for something beyond this room. Is there more? She asked. Speak it. I would rather hear unwelcome news now than be surprised later. The hall went quiet. Even the echo of the forges seemed to dim for a heartbeat. It was Tyrion who broke the silence. "There is the matter of the ravens, your grace," he said. "Ravens." The word hooked into the place in her that still knew the snap of cold wind on Dragonstone's battlements, the memory of a great chair of black stone forged from a conqueror's dreams. Ravens meant letters. Letters meant ink-black lines stitching their way over leagues of sea and land, bringing word of places she had not seen in years. She kept her voice very steady. "What ravens?" Tyrion's gaze met hers, level and serious. "From the west," he said simply. "From Westeros." The word was a stone dropped into the hall. It rippled through the faces around the table, stirred mutters like faint breezes ruffling fields. Orien Bellarys's eyes sharpened. The Braavosi envoy's brows leapt. The High Flamekeeper's fingers flexed inside his sleeves, as if he wanted to reach for something more than rubies. Daenerys's hand curled on the obsidian. "I receive letters from Westeros," she said. "House Valerian petitions for trade. The Archmaester writes of your citadel's interest in Valyrian lore. Lord Grafton of Gulltown sends pleas for ships. These are not new. These are not from gulls," Tyrion said softly, "nor from men hoping to make themselves rich on your forge smoke. These are different." He slipped a hand into his doublet and drew out a bundle of parchment tied in red silk, then set them G&TLY on the table between them. "We have had 3 in as many months. I withheld them until today because I wanted answers before questions. I have some of the former now. I cannot promise you will like them." "You withheld them?" The words came out sharper than she intended. Missandei's gaze flicked up, watchful. Tyrion inclined his head. "I did. If you wish me to be a hand who brings you every rumor that flaps into our eaves, say so, and I shall bury you in quills. But I have found, in my regrettably long acquaintance with power, that sometimes what we need from our messengers is not haste, but discretion." "You decide what I'm ready to hear?" she asked. "I decide when news has moved from mere noise to something that may shape your day," he said. "If I misjudged, I will accept whatever scolding you find satisfying, but I will still advise patience next time as well." The old fire in her rose, wanting to reach across the table, to sweep the parchments to the floor, to declare that nothing from that cold, treacherous land could matter here. It had taken her years to uncurl her heart from around the hurts of Westeros, to stop waking from dreams where she stood before a throne of swords only to watch it crumble into ash under her dragon's fire. Here, in the heat and stink and constant clamor of New Valyria, she had carved out something that was hers and no one else's. She had not sailed west. She had turned instead toward the roar on the horizon where the doom still smoldered, and in doing so she had rewritten the shape of her life. And yet, "Open them," she said. Tyrion broke the silk with his thumb. He did not hand them to her at once. Instead, he drew the topmost parchment closer and weighed it down with his fingers, his gaze flickering over its lines as if to confirm once more what he was about to place in her hands. "This came from the wall," he said, "or what remains of it. The handwriting is unremarkable. The words are not." "The wall," she repeated. Her mouth felt very dry. "It stands, then, in some fashion, according to this," Tyrion said. "I suppose it's difficult to kill something that has grown roots in men's minds. Even when you break it, they still call the rubble by its old name." He slid the letter closer. The parchment was stained along the edges as if by damp or smoke. A black wax seal had once held it closed, but only a smear of it remained now. Daenerys reached out and took it. The glyphs swam for a heartbeat, old fear and anger rising up to blur her sight with memory. A cold throne room in King's Landing, a sword in her chest, the smell of burning flesh. No, that was a dream from the world that never happened. A world she had seen in visions and prophecy, and the fever heat of opening doors she had not yet walked through. Not her world, not this one. She forced herself to breathe. The letters steadied. To her Grace Daenerys Targaryen, it began in careful script, "Queen across the sea." He had used the common tongue. "My queen, my blood." The ink wavered in places, as if the hand that had held the quill had cramped or shivered. "We have not met, and perhaps we never will." There was a time when I thought to ride to you, to bend the knee and place my life in your hands. That time has gone. All the same, there are things you should know. My name is Jon Snow. I was once Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. I have been called bastard and king and traitor. I am tired of names. What matters is this. The dead walked and I saw them. The long night came for us, and we met it with fire and steel and blood. We won. That is one way of saying it. We stopped them. Another way is to say enough of us died that the rest could pretend victory. Daenerys's fingers tightened, crinkling the parchment's edge. The words dragged up echoes of tales she had heard in Karth and Meereen, in Astapor and along the trade routes of the Jade Sea. Stories of pale things in the north, of a winter that was not merely weather but hunger made flesh. She had dismissed some, half-believed others. She had been busy remaking cities of brick and flesh and fear. The world was always ending somewhere, if you believed every priest and drunken sailor. But Jon Snow, she remembered that name from her hand's mouth. He had spoken of this man once, in that wan, sleep-starved voice he adopted when memory hurt. The bastard of Winterfell who had been made king in the north. The man who had urged her to fight for the living, in the life she might have had. He does not know this. He only knows his own. She read on. The wall is broken in places but stands in others. The dead are gone. The White Walkers shattered like glass under dragonglass and Valyrian steel. We fought them in snow and storm and the dark between, and the cost was high. Too high to count. We had 3 dragons. Now we have none. The breath went out of her as if someone had struck her. Tyrion watched her, his mouth a flat line. Missandei's eyes were dark pools, seeing too much. She forced herself not to look toward the open sky, toward the roost where Drogon would will back at some point, toward the distant shrieks of her younger dragons playing in the currents above the sea. This letter speaks of another world, she told herself. Another river, another shore. But the grief in the ink felt like something that could have been hers. We killed the Night King, the letter went on. We killed him and the horde of dead broke. But some of what he woke remains. Not corpses, but wounds. The north is colder now than the south remembers. The seas shift. The old magics along the wall's foundations crack and flare. Things move in the shadows that the maesters do not yet have names for. The men in their towers write of rebuilding, of planting new grain, of reforging alliances. They send ravens about gold and titles. They do not write of nightmares. They do not write of what sleeps beneath the ice and the stones. You have rebuilt Valyria. The words W. Air underlined, as if he had pressed harder there. We hear stories here. Men talk of dragons in the east, of a new city on the smoking sea, of a queen who broke chains and bent dragons to her will. Some call you a new doom. Some call you a savior waiting to burn us all the way a field is burned to kill the rot. I do not know you. I know only what I have seen. Fire is not only destruction. Fire is also life. Without it, we would not have survived what walked. The wall's magic is changing, your grace. The world is not as it was. The forces that broke Valyria in the first place did not vanish. They shifted. They sleep. They watch. I cannot see them, but I feel them. The old maesters would call this fancy. The old gods would call it whisper. I do not know what I want from you. I do not have the right to ask you for anything. But if you are truly what they say, a queen of dragons who would break the wheel instead of riding it, then I think you should know that the wheel itself is cracking. Not in thrones and crowns, but in the bones of the world. Maybe nothing will happen. Maybe the wall will crumble quietly into history. Maybe old magics will sink away like smoke. Maybe the nightmares are just dreams. But if they are not, if something is coming again, it will not be stopped by men with steel alone. We bled ourselves nearly white last time. There is not enough left of us to do it again without help. If you ever look west at sunset and wonder what waits on the other shore, know this: there are people here who remember that you were once meant to be our queen. There are people who curse your name. There are people who would kneel to you if you came with fire. There are people who would stand against you even if the dead walked at your shoulder. But there are also people who will die if the cracks spread and no one stands in them. I do not know you, Daenerys Targaryen. I do not know if this letter will even reach you, or if it will burn in some Braavosi counting house, or sink in a storm. But I write it because if I did not, the words would rot inside me. I have seen too much death to die with what I know unspoken. Do what you will with this, Jon Snow. For a time, the only sound in Daenerys' ears was the slow, heavy beat of her own heart. The hall seemed very far away, its heat thinned, its voices muffled. She read the last lines again, and again, until the loops and slashes of the quill ceased to be words and became merely ink. A queen who never was, she thought. A war I never fought. Dragons that were never mine. She placed the letter gently on the table, smoothing its edge with her thumb. How many of these? She asked, not taking her eyes from the parchment. 3, Tyrion said. The others are shorter. One is nearly all practical detail about what this Jon Snow claims to have seen at the wall. The composition of ice, cracks in the wards, a raven's nest of magical speculation that makes my head ache. The third is, forgive me, your grace, but it is more plea than argument. Come, he writes, come before something worse than the Night King finds the weakness we left. She swallowed. And you believed him. Tyrion's mouth twisted. Believe is a strong word. I remember, however, what happened the last time I refused to believe in dead men walking, and what it cost all of us. I am not eager to repeat that mistake, nor to repeat the others I made afterward. His eyes met hers, and there was the ghost of a burning throne room between them, the echo of bells, the taste of ash on the tongue. Not here, not ours, but near enough that the air seemed to thicken with it. You told me once that when a Targaryen is born, the gods toss a coin, Tyrion said quietly. I have seen lands where the coin came up fire. I have wondered lately if perhaps the gods toss more than one coin at a time, for more than one world. In some, you sailed west. In some, you burned it. In this one, you turned east and chose to rebuild instead of conquer. Perhaps this letter is a coin tossed toward us from another table. You think some ghost of myself burned his world, she said, feeling herself go very still. And now the ashes reach across to stain mine. I think, Tyrion said slowly, that if a man who once saved the world or tried to write from the edge of it to say the ground is cracking, we should at least listen. Even if his world is not precisely ours. The wall exists in this world as well. The North knows old stories. Your dragons woke things when they were born. Magic does not always respect borders drawn on maps. The High Flamekeeper inclined his head, rubies flashing. The fires whisper, to your grace. For months now, we have seen shadows in the flames that are not cast by any in this hall. You always see shadows, she said. It is your trade. Yes, his voice softened. But these are shaped like men of ice and vaults of stone cracking. And... He hesitated, just long enough to make the pause deliberate. And like dragons with no rider. Convenient, Tyrion muttered under his breath. Missandei touched the stylus to her slate and then set it down. Your grace, she said in that calm, precise way of hers. When we came here, you said you chose Valyria because it was the root of so much that was broken in the world. You wanted to mend the root, not merely prune the branches. If the root itself is cracking beneath us, should we not know? We are knowing now, Orien Bellarys said, his voice cooler than the hall. And what does this knowing demand of us? That we abandon New Valyria to chase ghosts on the other side of the world? That we put our ships and dragons at the mercy of northern snows and men who once hunted our kind to near extinction? You fled that extinction, Missandei reminded him softly. Across seas in secret ships, this queen gave you a home. And I would not see that home jeopardized because of some foreign man's dreams, Orien snapped, eyes flashing. Our forges are barely stable. Our walls are half-finished. Our dragons are few compared with the legends. You would drag our queen into another people's war when we have not yet secured our own peace. It may not be another people's war, Grey Worm said, stepping closer to the table at last. His voice carried none of Tyrion's irony, none of Orion's heat. It was flat, steady, the voice of a man whose life had been a series of commands obeyed. If the world cracks, it will crack under all our feet. Not only Westeros's. Daenerys listened to them, their words swirling around the stillness that seemed to have settled in the center of her chest. The obsidian under her fingers had grown warm. Or maybe that was only her blood. Once, she thought, I wanted that throne more than breath. I told myself it was my right, my birthright, the thing stolen from my family, my people. I would have burned cities to claim it. She had burned cities in one world. She knew that as one knows the memory of a fever, the House of the Undying had shown her visions that tasted of more than prophecy. Some she had outrun. Some had hung over her like storm clouds until she'd chosen another road. Some, she suspected, still waited around unseen bends. Here there was no iron throne, no bells tolling surrender, no ash drifting down like snow over the charred husk of a city that had once been hers to save. There was only endless work. Stone to shape, water to carry, laws to write, hearts to bring along by the hand or drag by the scruff of the neck. It was, in some ways, harder than conquest. It was also more honest. She thought of Drogon's eyes meeting hers above the vent, of the way his pupils had narrowed to slits as they shared that small, wordless understanding. Dragons belonged to the sky, to fire, to what was wild and could not be caged. She had asked him to help her cage some of that wildness, to lend his flame to forging bridges and beams and pipes instead of only fear. Now the world itself asked something else of her, perhaps, to uncage a part of what she had tamed. "Leave us," she said abruptly. Murmurs broke out anew. She lifted her hand. "Tyrion, Missandei, Grey Worm, stay," she added. "The rest of you go. We will reconvene at dusk. By then, I expect you all to have thought more on cisterns and forges and riots than on letters from lands you have never seen." Orien Bellarese looked as if he might protest, but something in her face must have dissuaded him. He rose and bowed, the movement sharp, and was gone in a rustle of gray silk. The High Flamekeeper dipped his head, murmuring something about prayers and signs. The Bravosi shuffled off, already calculating the implications for trade. When the last of them had filed out, the hall felt abruptly too large. The echoes swallowed even the distant clang of hammers. Tyrion poured himself more wine. This time he did drink, a swallow that seemed to burn all the way down. "Well," he said into the quiet, "you did not throw the letter into the fire. That is a promising start. When I was a younger man, queens tended to burn letters before reading them, and sometimes the messengers as well." Daenerys traced one of the inked letters with the tip of her finger, careful not to smear it. "Jon Snow, Jon Snow." The name felt heavy. "I do not know this man," she said, "yet I feel as if I should." "That may be the point," Tyrion said. For once, there was no jest in his tone. "If what I suspect is true, he may know versions of you that you never became, and you may bear the weight of acts you never committed. You both live in the shadow of choices made and unmade." "That is a poet's answer," Grey Worm said. He had not moved from his place by her chair, but his eyes had not left her face. "It is the only sort I have on hand," Tyrion said. "Would you prefer an Unsullied's? Give me a few years and I shall learn how to polish one." Missandei folded her hands lightly, the slate lying forgotten on the table. "Your Grace," she said. "What do you feel?" Daenerys closed her eyes. At once, the images came. A wall of ice as high as the sky, men in black furs, eyes blue as winter, a sword of burning steel held aloft, dragons falling from the sky with spears in their hearts. They were not memories, not in the way she remembered the taste of horse meat on the Dothraki Sea or the scent of spice markets in Karth. They were impressions, impressions that had haunted her dreams since before she ever laid eyes on Valyria. Sometimes she had thought them mere warnings from the Undying. Sometimes she had thought them temptations. Now they felt like branches of a tree she had not climbed, paths her feet had not taken. "I feel..." She groped for words and found none that were simple. as if the ghosts of choices I never made have come to knock at my door, demanding that I account for them. She opened her eyes, and underneath that I feel angry. Angry that a world which was content to forget me, to exile me, now dares send me its broken pieces to mend. So do not mend them, Tyrion said gently. You have that right. You have already saved tens of thousands from chains, reshaped this blasted land into something that can sustain more than ghosts. You owe Westeros nothing. Do you believe that? She asked. He hesitated. I believe, he said slowly, that guilt is not the same as duty. In that other life where you sailed west, I owed you an honesty I did not give. I will not compound that here by telling you that you must help Jon Snow because of what he did for you in a story you did not live. You must decide based on this world. Its wheel, its risks, its needs. And yours. Grey Worm's voice came quiet and firm. You told us, when we followed you here, that we were building a place where no one would again be taken from their homes in chains. If the world cracks, they will be taken in other ways. By hunger, by fear, by dead things that walk. If this is true, his gaze flicked to the lead. Then this war, if it comes, will not be only Westeros's. Missandei nodded once. And if it is not true, she said, if Jon Snow writes from a place of hurt and fear that no longer matches this world, then we will have lost some ship's time, and risked some dragon's wings, and perhaps taught our people that their queen cares for more than the land beneath her feet. The risk of going is great, but what is the risk of not going? Daenerys rose. The movement drew all their eyes. She took the letter in her hand, not because she needed to read it again, but because she needed the feeling of its rough edges under her fingers. Then she walked away from the table, the soft soles of her boots whispering on the mosaic. The hall's western end opened onto a broad balcony, its low parapet looking out over the city and the smoking sea beyond. The heat here was fiercer, unsoftened by walls. The wind rushed up the cliff face, smelling of salt and ash. She stepped out into it alone. The others stayed back, but she could feel their attention like a hand between her shoulder blades. Below, New Valyria sprawled, half-finished and wholly alive. Smoke rose in threads and pillars from hundreds of chimneys and vents. The cry of gulls mingled with the shouts of stevedores and the clang of hammers. Somewhere to the south, one of her younger dragons swooped low over the harbor, sending a wave of panic and laughter through the ships below. The beast's scales flashed jade in the lowering sun. Beyond the city, the sea glimmered, calm for now. The scattered black teeth of ruined isles pricked the horizon. When she had first come here, the waters had seemed uncanny, haunted. Sailors had whispered of mists that swallowed men, of stone men clinging to hulls like barnacles. They still whispered, but now their mutters were threaded with curses about harbor fees and arguments about fishing rights. She had taken a scar on the face of the world and carved something living into it. Valyria, she said under her breath, tasting the old name. The sun caught the palace walls to either side, turning the black stone's edges to copper. They broke you. They broke the world. What do I owe you? Ancestor I never knew. The wind did not answer, but something deep below her feet thrummed, faint as a dragon's heartbeat. There is a boy at the end of the world, she thought suddenly, with a weariness in his ink. He has seen winter's true teeth. He asks for nothing directly. That makes me trust him more than I otherwise might. She thought of Rhaegar Targaryen, whose songs her brother had spoken of as if they were scripture. Of Aerys, her father, whose madness had burned thousands. Of all the Targaryens between them who had ridden their dragons like gods and ruled like men, sometimes wise, often cruel. Their line had come from this land. Perhaps, if the stories were true, from the very fires that shook beneath her. If the root is cracking, Missandei had said, should we not know? If the world cracks, Grey Worm had said, it will crack under all our feet. She closed her eyes and imagined Westeros as she had once seen it on stolen maps. A long, rough hand of land, jutting into the sunset sea. King's Landing somewhere at its center, Old Town in the south, Winterfell and the Wall in the north. Places she might never set foot upon, but places whose fates were tied to the same sky, the same tides, the same deep forces that had melted Valyria and then gone quiet, biding their time. "Drogon," she whispered. She did not summon him with a shout. She did not need to. The bond between rider and dragon was not just sound. It was hunger and heat and the thrum of shared skies. She opened herself to it now, letting her thoughts stretch outward, down over the roosts, over the forges, searching for the familiar ember that was his presence. "There," he answered, not in words but in feeling. A flare of attention, a spike of curiosity, the taste of whatever he had just eaten, goat, perhaps, or fish, rising in the back of her throat as if she had eaten it herself. His mind pressed against hers like a great hot head nudging her palm. "Come," she thought, "come to me." The air shifted minutes later as a shadow loomed overhead. Drogon's roar rolled over the palace like thunder. He alighted on the lower parapet, claws crunching stone, wings furling with a leathery slap. His nostrils snorted steam. He lowered his head to her, breath hot enough to make her eyes water. "I rebuilt your cradle," she said softly, placing her hand between his nostrils. "Now they ask if I will carry you to another fire." His pupils narrowed, then spread, drinking her in. Images flickered in the contact. Burning fields, shattered chains, long flights over trackless sea. There was no concept of Westeros in his mind, only places where he had hunted and slept and mated. Dragons were not sentimental. They did not ponder history. They knew hunger and storm and flame. Yet when she let the memory of ice touch the edge of her thoughts, ice walls taller than towers, cold so deep it burned, he recoiled, a low growl building in his chest. His scales along the spine prickled. "Not just fire," she murmured. "The world is more than one kind of death." She turned back toward the hall. Tyrion stood just within the threshold, Missandei at his side, Grey Worm a step behind as ever. "I will not abandon what we have built here," she said, the words clear and strong, carrying across the distance. "Valyria rises. Our people have sweat and bled for every stone. I will not sail west as a conqueror who leaves her home half-made." Tyrion inclined his head, as if he had expected no less. "But," she continued, and that word felt like the world itself tipping on some unseen pivot, "I will not ignore this. If the forces that broke this land stir again, if the wall in the north is fraying, then New Valyria cannot hide behind its smoke. We will not live upon the edge of the world and pretend its heart is not our concern." Grey Worm's shoulders seemed to ease, just a fraction. Missandei's eyes softened. "What do you intend, my queen?" Tyrion asked. "Information first," Daenerys said. "Truth if it can be had. We will send ships, not armies. A small fleet, one dragon, no more. We will not show Westeros our full strength until we know whether we go as saviors, traitors, or enemies." Tyrion's brow rose. "And who, exactly, do you intend to send on this jaunt to the land where they roast Targaryens like chestnuts?" She drew breath. Every instinct in her screamed to say, "I will go." To Mount Drogon, to feel the old wind of her exile in her face again. To see with her own eyes the land that had haunted her. To face whatever waited there without interposing anyone else. But she remembered the boy with the wooden dragon stick, leaping over slag puddles, the laborers on the scaffolds, the women filling buckets at incomplete cisterns, the men at the dragon forges who had been slaves all their lives and now shaped metal for their own queen, not a master. She could not leave them leaderless, not yet, not on a rumor, no matter how heartfelt. "I will stay," she said, the words tasting like iron. "For now, Drogon will stay with me. We cannot show weakness here, not while Volantis snarls and bravos weighs us on its golden scales and the old blood watches for any fissure to slip through." She lifted the letter slightly. "But we will answer Jon Snow. He has written to a queen he knows only from stories. We will show him that stories change. Missandei, you will draft a reply." Missandei bowed her head minutely. "Of course, your grace. Tell him that New Valyria hears him." Tell him that we know of the cracks in the wall's magic in our world as well, that our own priests feel them in their fires. Ask him for all he knows, without flattery and without trying to make him bow before he speaks. He is not my subject. Not yet. He is a man standing in a place where the world has broken before. I would treat him as such. A small, wry smile touched Tyrion's mouth. I will help her with that, he said. The art of asking men for things without making them feel owned is one of the few I have actually practiced with some success. Daenerys nodded once in acknowledgement. As for who we send, she went on, we will choose those who can represent what we are building, not only what we can burn. An envoy with soldiers enough to be safe, but not to be a threat unless threatened first. She looked to Grey Worm. You have officers you trust who know the common tongue, who have seen war and peace both, she said. Choose a commander and 50 unsullied. No more. They will be the spine of our embassy guard. Yes, my queen, Grey Worm said. I will choose well. We will also send a builder, she said, glancing back toward the hall where Mazdan had departed. Someone who can see cracks in walls in more than one sense. And a priest, though I will not have sermons be the first thing Westeros hears from Valyria. The High Flamekeeper will be displeased if you do not let him choose his own emissary, Tyrion said. Which is, of course, an excellent reason to choose someone else. I will speak with him, Daenerys said. He may suggest someone whose faith burns without burning everything it touches. And who will speak for you? Missandei asked softly. Who will Westeros see and say, this is the Queen's voice? Daenerys's gaze fell on her. Missandei did not look away. You were a slave girl in chains, she thought. I bought your freedom. You chose to stay when you could have gone. You have seen the worst of what men will do with power, and yet you sit here and help me wield mine. If I send you, Daenerys said, you will not be safe. Westeros is not Essos. They look at skin and name and make judgments I have no patience for. They will not see your mind first. They will see only what they have been taught to fear or disregard. That has been true in more places than Westeros, Missandei said softly, and still I have walked them. You are more than my voice, Daenerys said. You are my friend, my sister, and sisters sometimes must go where the blood runs thin, to remind it that the heart still beats, Missandei replied. A small smile touched her lips, then faded. If you ask me to go, I will go. Not because I am fearless, because we have built something here that must not be lost. And sometimes the best way to protect a home is to know what storms are coming. Daenerys felt something twist in her chest. Fear, pride, love, they were difficult to untangle. You will go, she said at last, voice steady. If you consent. I do, Missandei said simply. To your side. Well, if you're sending your wisest counselor into a land determined to misunderstand her, you may as well send your least trustworthy one to keep her amused. Daenerys's mouth quirked despite herself. You would go back? Tyrion took another drink, staring out at the smoke-wreathed horizon. I have no great desire to smell King's Landing again, he said, or to be recognized in taverns for crimes I did commit and others I did not. But I have unfinished quarrels with that strip of land, and unfinished debts to the notion that it might someday be better than it was under my charming sister. If I can help keep this world from burning in a different way than the one I helped midwife in another, then perhaps my nights will grow quieter. He met her eyes. Besides, I find I have grown rather fond of living in a city where people fear dragons more than they fear Lannisters. A change of scenery might remind me why I prefer your rule. You think you can walk into Westeros again without 100 knives finding you? Grey Worm asked bluntly. Tyrion shrugged. I have survived worse odds, and I do not intend to walk alone. Daenerys let the thought settle. Missandei and Tyrion together, a woman once enslaved and a man once a prince of a cruel house, walking into the broken heart of a land that had never fully claimed her. Very well, she said. You will go with Missandei. You will lead the mission as my hand. Make it clear to Westeros that you speak with my full authority. Let them see that New Valyria does not hide its hand, nor its conscience. Conscience, Tyrion repeated, tasting the word. That is a heavy thing to ship. See that you do not let it fall overboard, she said. He bowed, not mockingly. As my queen commands. She turned then to Grey Worm. Choose your men. Have them ready within a fortnight. Ensure they understand they are not going as conquerors but as shields. No pillaging, no intimidation. If they must fight, they fight cleanly. If they are insulted, they endure unless their lives are in danger. I will not have Westeros's first true glimpse of my rule be unsullied cutting down drunk lords in taverns. I will choose men who can stand and not strike, Grey Worm said. There was a flicker in his eyes, a memory, perhaps, of walking the streets of Meereen with spears bared, of riots, of killings later regretted. They have learned. We all have. And while you sail, Daenerys said, turning back toward the city, we will continue to build. We will finish the cisterns and stabilize the forges. We will make of New Valyria such a fortress of life that if the world cracks, it will not sink us by surprise. She looked west. The sun was sinking, its lower edge kissing the rim of the smoking sea. The sky beyond it merged into a haze that, on clear days, sailors claimed showed a faint, dark line, the hint of another shore beyond the curve of the world. Send word east as well, she said suddenly. To Karth, to Astapor, to Meereen and Yunkai, to all the cities we touched and changed. Tell them the Mother of Dragons calls a council of all those who broke chains. If something is stirring in the dark, I will not have us each stand alone, waiting to be plucked off like fruit. Tyrion chuckled softly. You intend to build an empire of wary allies, then, instead of subjects. I intend, Daenerys said, to build something that can stand when I am gone. Empires crumble when they lean on one person too heavily. Perhaps I learned that from the stories of my father. Perhaps from the ghosts of queens who burned what they meant to save. Perhaps from seeing a single arrow fell a dragon. She shook her head. Either way, I will not make a world that depends on me alone. Drogon snorted, smoke curling from his nostrils as if in disagreement. She smiled and touched his jaw. You may disagree, she told him softly, but you are not the one who must sit in councils and argue about water. He huffed, offended. Behind her, Tyrion cleared his throat. Then we are agreed, he said. A measured mission west. No grand fleets yet. No banners blazing over the Red Keep. Just a hand extended into the dark, hoping it finds a hand and not teeth. Not hoping, Daenerys said, feeling the new shape of her resolve settle into place. It was not the fierce, reckless sureness of youth. It was a steadier thing, edged with fear and acceptance. Knowing that whatever it finds, we will face it with eyes open. She looked down at the letter again, the ink now dry and slightly cracked. Jon Snow. Somewhere, a man who had fought a war she had not fought, against enemies she had never seen, had written to her across worlds and oceans and years. You were once meant to be our queen, he had written. Tell him, she said to Missandei, that once I thought Westeros was all there was, that I have learned otherwise. Tell him I do not come as a savior promised by fate, but as a woman who has seen what men do with power and seeks to do differently. Tell him I will listen. And tell him that if the world is cracking, I do not intend to watch it splinter from a safe distance. Missandei's eyes shone, though whether with unshed tears or reflected light, Daenerys could not say. I will tell him, she said, in every tongue I know, until the meaning cannot be mistaken. And when you stand before him, Daenerys added, remind him that dragons are not the only ones who rise from ruin. She turned back to the city, to the hiss and clatter and roar of it, to the sight of cranes lifting stone, of children racing along half-finished streets, of smoke that meant not only destruction but cooking fires and warm baths and forges. New Valyria lay before her, incomplete and stubborn and fragile and fierce. Behind her, in ink and in ice, waited a land that had once been only a promise and a wound. Between them, stretched across the sea, lay the path that her story would take now. Not one of the futures she had seen in visions. Not precisely. Something new. Something hers. The wind rose, hot and alive, and Daenerys Targaryen, rebuilder of Valyria, stood at the edge of her balcony and watched the sun sink toward the west, knowing that for the first time in years, she would meet its path halfway. Night came slow to New Valyria, reluctant to smother flame. The city did not truly darken. It softened. The glare of sun on black stone gave way to the red-gold pulse of the dragon forges, to rows of lanterns hung along half-finished streets, to cooking fires that winked on one by one in the lower quarters. From her high balcony, Daenerys watched it all as the last color bled out of the sky, leaving only a band of molten orange at the western rim. Behind her, the hall had emptied. Tyrion had gone to draft letters to Volantis and Braavos and the other city-states whose temper needed soothing. Grey Worm had disappeared to the barracks with a purpose in his shoulders that meant half the garrison would be awake past midnight. The High Flamekeeper had gone to his fires to peer into things and call them signs. Orien Bellarys had taken his wounded pride back to whatever neat house he had made for himself among the Old Blood Quarter. Only Missandei stayed a moment low. Inger, standing a little way behind Daenerys, her presence a quiet warmth at the edge of awareness. "The ink will keep," Daenerys said at last, without turning. "You need not begin the letter tonight." "The ink will keep," Missandei agreed. "But thoughts shift in sleep. I would like to catch yours while they are as they are now." Daenerys looked over her shoulder. In the half-light, Missandei's face was all plains and shadow, her eyes large and dark. "I thought you knew my thoughts better than I do," Daenerys said lightly. "You have been arranging them into sense for years." Missandei's mouth curved faintly. "I know the shapes your words take when you speak as a queen, a Khaleesi, a breaker of chains," she said. "I do not always know the shapes they take when you speak as Daenerys alone. Those are the ones that matter most now, I think." Daenerys turned fully, leaning back against the parapet. The stone at her hips was still warm, holding the day's heat. Above, stars pricked through the deepening blue, faint at first, then more of them, like shy eyes peering out. "Very well," she said. "Ask. What do you want him to hear first?" Missandei asked. "This Jon Snow. The first lines will set the tone. A greeting, a threat, a promise." "He is not my enemy," Daenerys said slowly. "So not a threat. Not for now." "No," Missandei agreed. "But he may be the herald of enemies we do not yet know. Sometimes you can warn a man that you will bare your teeth without biting him first." Daenerys thought of the letter's opening. "My queen. My blood." "Not my queen," she said. "He does not know me. He owes me nothing. Let us not pretend at a loyalty that doesn't exist." Missandei nodded once, filing that away. Then perhaps, to Jon Snow at the wall. "No," Daenerys said again. "The wall is not a man's whole being. And if it is cracking, I will not tie his name to its ruin." "Then simply to Jon Snow," Missandei said. "From Daenerys of House Targaryen, Queen of New Valyria." "That, at least, is still true," Daenerys said. She fell quiet, listening to far-off sounds. A hawker's shout, the creak of wagon wheels, the faint trumpeting complaint of one of her younger dragons as someone below strayed too close to its roost. "You asked what I feel," she said at last. "I did not answer all of it." Missandei waited. She had learned long ago that Daenerys' words came in waves, sometimes crashing all at once, sometimes pulling back to reveal what lay beneath. "I feel as if the world is bigger than the work I have given myself," Daenerys said. "As if I have been mending one wall in a house that is listing, and now someone has knocked at the door to say the foundations are cracked all the way down to the bedrock. And you feel you should have known," Missandei said gently. "Yes." Daenerys let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it had not been so thin. "Arrogant, isn't it? To think that because I have dragons and a city, the world owes me its secrets." "The world does not owe them," Missandei said. "But it is right that you wish to see the whole of what you are building upon." A house falls differently if the ground crumbles than if only the roof leaks. You would make a good builder, Daenerys said. I would make an impatient one, Missandei replied. I prefer words to stones. Stones bruise the fingers. Daenerys's gaze wandered back toward the dragon forges. The glow from their great vents pulsed, steady and strong. For so long, she said softly. The word Valyria meant only grief to me, the place that birthed my line and then devoured it, the place that made dragons and then shattered them. I wanted to spit when I heard it. Now it is in my title, and on the tongues of children who have never seen another land. It is good, Missandei said, to take the words that hurt and remake them. Is it? Daenerys looked at her, eyes sharp suddenly. Or is it just painting old wounds in new colors? Some nights I lie awake and think I have done nothing but replace one kind of fire with another. Missandei stepped closer. The lantern light caught the silver rings in her hair. You freed men and women from chains, she said. You did not bind them to new ones. You have made mistakes. You have burned when you should have spoken, and been silent when you should have shouted. So have we all. But I walked the city streets today, Your Grace. I heard a fisherman's daughter complain that her mother made her carry water too far. I heard a boy shout that his friend had stolen his toy dragon. I heard a woman curse the cost of onions. Those are small complaints. That is how it should be. You gave them the freedom to have small problems instead of only surviving big ones. Daenerys' shoulders eased, a fraction. You make me sound nobler than I am. I make you sound as you are, Missandei said. Complicated, flawed, trying. She touched the letter still in Daenerys' hand. This Jon Snow sounds complicated too. Yes, Daenerys said. That may be why I cannot easily turn away from him. She remembered the quaver in the ink where he had written "We have none" when speaking of dragons. Grief could seep even into the strokes of a pen. I want him to know I do not think myself a goddess, she said, nor a savior sent by some prophecy. I did once. I walked through fire and came out with dragons, and thought the flames had crowned me. The world showed me otherwise. Tell him I come as a woman who has learned that her choices do not only weigh on her, but on thousands. That I have burned, but I am learning when not to. Missandei inclined her head. I will find the words. Do you fear going? Daenerys asked quietly. Missandei did not answer at once. Down in the harbor, a bell clanged, marking some shift or curfew. A dog barked, then another. Yes, Missandei said finally. I fear. I have seen men look at my skin and decide they know my worth. I have seen what happens to women caught in wars between and noble houses. Westeros has never sounded gentle in your tales. You make it sound as if I have spoken of it often, Daenerys said. I thought I spared you my ghosts. You did, Missandei said. Mostly, but when you could not sleep in Meereen, you used to walk to the balcony and stare west. You said nothing. You did not have to. Daenerys looked away, a rueful smile touching her mouth. You see more than I show. I listened to what you did not say, Missandei said. It told me enough. Westeros is where you were meant to go and did not. That makes it heavy. She took a breath. I fear it, and I go anyway because you trust me, and because there is a boy at a wall of ice who has written more honestly than most kings I have heard describe their victories. Daenerys stepped forward and took Missandei's hands. The contact steadied her more than the stone at her back. If they harm you, she said quietly, I will burn whatever harbor you last stepped into. I will salt their fields. I will. You will not, Missandei said gently, because you are not your father, and you are not the queen in the nightmares. You will be furious. You will grieve. You will think of doing terrible things. And then you will do what keeps the most people alive. She tightened her hold. But it is good to hear you say it. It reminds me that I am not going alone. You are with me, even when you stay here. Daenerys let out a breath that shook once, then steadied. You shame my doubts. I carry them, Missandei said. We all do. That is what councils are for, sharing the weight until it does not crush one person. They stood like that for a time, hands clasped, the city breathing around them. Then Missandei gently disengaged. "I will go and let the ink feel my hand," she said. "Sleep if you can, my queen. There will be much to decide at dawn." When Daenerys was alone, the night pressed closer. Drogon shifted below, settling his bulk along the lower parapet like a watchdog. His presence was a comfort against the vastness that suddenly opened in front of her. Not the physical chasm between balcony and ground, but the one between what had been and what might be. Westeros, she thought. Jon Snow, cracks in the wall, magic stirring like something restless beneath the skin. The wind off the sea tasted faintly of brine and ash. For the first time in years, she did not know whether it carried promise or warning. Sleep came fitfully. She dreamed of corridors of ice instead of black stone, of fires that would not catch, of faces she did not know that somehow felt familiar. A woman with red hair standing on a battlement, her cloak whipping in a snowstorm. A tall man with a tired smile and eyes that held storms. Dragons screaming as they fell, their wings tattered by some invisible force. A throne of swords slick with melted frost. In the last dream, she stood on a field of snow and ash. Two armies faced each other across churned ground, one bearing banners of wolves and stags, the other dragons and lions. The sky was a low, heavy lid. Drogon crouched beneath her, muscles bunching, his heat a promise under her hands. But when she looked to the man standing opposite her, a man with dark curls and a face marked by grief, she felt no hatred, only an ache that had no name. He raised a sword that glowed like dawn. She felt the point in her chest before she saw him move. Daenerys woke with her own hand pressed against her sternum, fingers digging hard enough to bruise. The room was dark save for the guttering glow of a single brazier. The air was cooler here, deep within the palace, insulated by thick walls. She lay still, feeling her heart hammer against her palm, until the dream's edges frayed enough that she could breathe without tasting snow. Beside the bed, a small table held a pitcher of water and a folded scrap of parchment. The sight of it tightened something in her throat until she realized the parchment was blank. Just a sheet Missandei had left for notes, not another letter from across the sea. She sat up slowly, swinging her feet over the edge. The floor was cool under her soles. It would be easy, she thought, to blame the House of the Undying for every troubling dream, to imagine that the visions it had shown her in Karth were seeping still into her sleep like a slow poison. It would be easy to convince herself that the letter from Jon Snow had simply stirred old images to the surface. Easy, not necessarily honest. She rose and dressed herself in simple linen, binding her hair back in a single thick braid, leaving off most of her jewelry. There was work to be done before the council reconvened, and she had no patience for the weight of gold this morning. Outside her door, an unsullied straightened, his spear but clicked on stone. "Captain," she said softly, "where is Grey Worm?" "In the East Barracks, my queen," the man replied. "He has not yet slept." Of course he hasn't, she thought. "I will find him. You may return to your post." He hesitated only a breath. The faintest flicker of disobedience before obedience reasserted itself. "Yes, my queen." The palace lay quiet at this hour. Servants moved through its corridors with soft steps, carrying baskets of bread and jugs of water, polishing carved stone, sweeping away the dust that never seemed to settle for long. A pair of dragons' roosts yawned open along one wall, empty, their occupants out hunting or playing in the pre-dawn cool. The sky beyond the high mullioned windows was still more velvet than blue, but a faint, lighter strip along the eastern horizon promised the sun. She found Grey Worm in the training yard. The yard had been carved directly out of the black stone plateau, its ground covered with sand to soften falls. Torches ringed its perimeter, casting flickering light over dummies, racks of practice spears, targets nailed to posts. At one end, a small shrine of sorts had been constructed. Nothing elaborate, just a stone column into which someone, perhaps Grey Worm himself, had carved the Giskari glyph for freedom. A small handful of pebbles lay at its base, offerings from men who had no gods but the memories of chains and the queen who had broken them. Grey Worm stood alone in the center of the yard, bare-armed despite the chill, his torso gleaming with sweat. He moved through spear drills with a precision that might have been mechanical if not for the intensity beneath it. Thrust, spin, duck, slash. His muscles bunched and released, his feet never quite still. "Commander," Daenerys called softly. He completed the sequence he was in, bringing the spear down to a rest position before turning. His chest rose and fell quickly, but his face showed little strain. "My queen," he said, dipping his head. "You have been here all night?" she asked. He angled his head slightly, as if consulting some internal tally. "Not all. I spoke with officers, wrote orders. Then I came here. You could sleep." "I will," he said, "when my mind is quiet." "Is it your mind that is restless or your men?" she asked. "Both," he admitted after a pause. "They do not fear battle. They do not fear sailing. But Westeros is unknown." He glanced at the edge of his spear. "We have fought men like the slavers, like the sons of the Harpy. We know their faces. We do not know these wolves and stags and lions from your stories." "Lions you know," Daenerys said. "Or one, at least." Grey Worm's mouth twitched. "The dwarf lion is different." "Yes," she said. "He is." She walked closer, stepping into the ring of torchlight. The sand shifted under her boots. "When I freed you," she said quietly, "I told you need never fight again if you did not choose it, that you could lay down spear and shield and pick up whatever life you wished." "Yes," he said. His gaze did not waver. "You did. Yet here you are, still drilling as if you expect an enemy behind every door," she said. "And now I ask you to send men into a land where I cannot promise them they will return. I told you once that you were free, and then I laid burdens on your shoulders. Does that feel like another kind of chain?" He considered that for a heartbeat, too. "When I was unsullied in Astapor," he said slowly, "I did not know fear. It was beaten out of me. If a master told me to die, I died. There was no choice, no self." He tapped his chest lightly. "When you set us free, I did not know what to do with my hands. There was no spear. There was only empty air. It was more frightening than any battle." "And now?" she asked. "Now I choose," he said simply. "I choose to hold a spear. I choose to drill. I choose to obey you because I believe in what you are making. That is not a chain. It is a direction." He searched for the word. "A path. I can step off it." "I do not." "And your men?" she asked. "They will go because I ask it," he said. "But also because they are proud to be chosen." When I told one of the lieutenants he might lead the guard, he stood taller. He asked how soon he could begin preparing. I saw light in his eyes. "Do you trust Westeros not to trample that light?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "I do not trust Westeros. I trust my men. I trust Missandei. I trust the hand to keep his tongue sharp. I trust that if they are wronged, we will not let it pass." Daenerys let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "You speak as if you intend to remain here." "Yes," he said, and there was a flicker of something like apology in his gaze. "I will not go with them." She felt the answer before he said it. It still landed with a small, sharp twist. "Because you do not want to see Westeros," she said. "Because my place is here," he replied. "If the envoy fails, if the ships are lost, if war comes, this city must be ready. The Unsullied must have their commander. The queen must have her shield. You send your voice and your hand across the sea. Your sword stays. Is that how you see yourself?" she asked softly. "As a sword. I see myself as Grey Worm," he said after a moment's thought. "That is enough. But I know what I am good at. I will not leave you without it." She stepped closer, close enough now to smell the clean salt of sweat and the faint leather tang of his harness. "When you told me once that you had no interest in women," she said, I thought I understood. Time has shown me otherwise. You felt love. You feel loyalty. You feel fear. You have more courage than any man who calls himself whole. She searched his face. Are you afraid that if you go, you will be unable to protect me? That something will happen while you are gone? Yes, he said simply. When you were taken by the sons of the Harpy in Meereen, when Drogon carried you away and you were gone in the sky, I could not breathe. I walked the city and saw enemies in every shadow. I will not feel that again if I can prevent it. You will still be unable to prevent some things, she said gently. Even if you stand at my side with a spear, there will always be shadows even you cannot see into. Yes, he said again, but I will stand there anyway. She touched his forearm, fingers resting lightly on the hard muscle. Choose your men then, she said. Train them till they can fight with their eyes closed and their hearts open. Remind them that they go not to conquer, but to guard. And when they sail, stand on the dock with me and watch them go. I will, he said. And Grey Worm, she added as she turned to leave. If this Jon Snow, if he proves false, if Westeros spits on the hand I send, then we will face that together too. I will not let your men die to feed someone else's pride. He bowed his head. I know, my queen. The sky was paling as she left the yard, purple bleeding into gray-blue. Workers were already stirring in the lower streets, their shouts faint from this height. The smell of baking bread drifted up from the palace kitchens, making her stomach growl despite the nod of. Unease still coiled there. In the great hall that doubled as council chamber and audience room, servants scurried to prepare for the day, setting out jugs of watered wine, unfurling awnings to shade the high windows, sweeping last night's dust into little piles they would carry out later. The skull above her chair seemed less ominous in morning light, more relic than threat. Mazdan arrived early, arms full of scrolls and thoughts. He nearly tripped over the threshold in his eagerness. Your Grace, he puffed, I have drawn up 3 new designs for the aqueducts. If we shift the line of the northmost channel half a league and tunnel under the ridge instead of around it, we can save weeks of work. But it will require more miners. We could ask the freedmen from later Mazdan, Daenerys said gently, though the sight of his enthusiasm tugged a smile from her. The cisterns will not vanish if we speak of them after sunrise. Have you slept? He blinked, as if the question were in a foreign tongue. I closed my eyes for a short time. How long? He frowned. An hour or 2. There were measurements I needed to recheck. After council, you will sleep for at least 6, she said. If I must have Tyrion drag you to your bed, he will enjoy it too much. Mazdan sputtered, then laughed, the lines at the corners of his eyes creasing deeper. Yes, my queen. Tyrion himself appeared not long after, looking as if he had slept even less than Mazdan. His hair stuck up on one side as if he had run his hands through it one too many times. He carried a sheaf of letters tied with cord and a half-drained cup of something that steamed. I have discovered, he announced as he limped to his place, that Braavosi ink smells different than Volantene ink. The Braavosi kind has a hint of fish to it. The Volantene smells of cheap perfume and regret. Regret? Daenerys echoed. Most of their letters lately consist of elaborate apologies for not being able to deliver what they promised, he said. Regret oozes from the parchment like oil. He took a sip from his cup, winced, as does whatever the cooks of this new city are passing off as breakfast wine. It is tea, Missandei said, entering with a slate tucked under one arm. I told them you should drink less wine in the mornings. I will have you know that tea is a barbaric foreign practice, Tyrion said. In Westeros, we prefer to greet the day with something that dulls our awareness of it. In Westeros, Missandei said dryly, you once told me you spent most mornings fleeing your father's wrath and your sister's contempt. I will take tea over that. Point to you, Tyrion conceded, raising the cup in salute. Daenerys watched them with a feeling that was both fond and aching. There had been a time when all her interactions with those around her had felt fraught. Every word weighed, every gesture scrutinized by men who would twist it against her. Here, with these two at least, she felt seen. Not as a symbol or a threat, but as herself. It was a dangerous comfort. It made it harder to imagine letting either of them sail beyond her reach. "Did you begin the letter?" she asked Missandei. "Yes," Missandei said, drawing a folded parchment from within her sleeve. "This is only the opening. I wish to hear it in your voice before going further." She offered it. Daenerys took it, smoothing it open on the obsidian. To Jon Snow, "Your ravens have found me. I do not know how far they flew, or what storms they crossed, or how many hands they passed through, but your words reached New Valyria. I have read them more than once. You wrote that you do not know me. That is true. I do not know you either. I know only stories. Of a man at the end of the world who held a line against death, of a king who did not want his crown, of a traitor who betrayed no one but those who love comfort more than truth. Stories lie, so do titles. I will not ask you to bend the knee to a queen you have only heard in songs and nightmares. I write to you as Daenerys of House Targaryen, who was born in exile and chose not to return to the thrones that exiled her, but to build something new instead. You say the wall is cracking. You say the forces that broke Valyria may be stirring again. I would call you mad, if I had not walked through fire and come out alive, if I had not seen what dragons do to the balance of the world. Magic is a river that does not care for borders. I know that much. If the bones of the world are shifting, as you believe, then what you face is not only your North's problem, nor only Westeros's. Valyria taught the world what happens when power is used without care. I am trying to teach it a different lesson. I do not know yet if I am succeeding. I will not promise you armies I have not yet chosen to commit, or dragons I have not yet asked to cross that much sea. Words are easy, ships are not. But I will promise you this. I am listening. I am watching. And I will not ignore the cracks you see, because if your wall falls badly, the tremor will be felt here too. I send to you my hand and my closest counselor, not as conquerors but as eyes and ears and voices. Hear them. Let them hear you. Between us, perhaps, we may find a way to make the world less likely to break again. Daenerys Targaryen, Queen of New Valyria, Breaker of Chains. Daenerys ran her thumb along the final line, feeling the weight of each word settle. I would change little, she said slowly, but I would add one thing. Missandei read her face, then nodded. Tell me. Somewhere near the beginning, Daenerys said, thinking. After I do not know you either, say that I am not writing only because he may be of use to me. Say that I recognize in his words the weariness of someone who has carried more than his share and is afraid of seeing it all undone. He should know that he is not shouting into a void, that we have also bled for a world that has not always thanked us. Tyrion snorted. Softly, diplomacy by shared trauma, not the worst foundation for an alliance. You have used worse, Daenerys said. Oh, certainly. He smiled faintly, then let it fade. Shall we speak of the rest of our plans? Or would you prefer to continue pretending this is simply a pleasant letter-writing exercise between old friends? We are not old friends, Daenerys said. We are ghosts in each other's stories. That may be close enough, Tyrion said. The morning council was shorter than the one the previous day. Daenerys moved them briskly through quarrels about harbor fees, disputes over quarry rights, a petition from a group of freed Astapori who wished to found a neighborhood governed by their own laws. She listened, asked questions, made decisions where she must and delegated where she could. When Orien Bellary spoke, she watched him closely. His manner was smooth, his words carefully chosen. He supported the new aqueduct plan once it became clear that refusing would mark him as indifferent to the common welfare. He did not mention Jon Snow or Westeros. His restraint told her more than any argument would have. He will not oppose me directly on this, she thought. Not yet, but he will whisper to those who fear I am spreading myself too thin. After council, she summoned him to a smaller chamber off the main hall, a room whose walls were still half rough, half-finished relief. A single long window slit looked east over the dragon forges, their smoke smudging the sky. Orien entered with a bow, his gray robes falling in clean lines. "Your Grace," he said. "Orion," she replied, motioning to a chair. She remained standing. Let him feel the shift of height. "We did not finish speaking yesterday. I had not realized the Queen felt our conversation incomplete," he said mildly. "I believed I had made my concerns clear." "You did," she said. "But you did not make your hopes clear, only your fears." Something flickered in his eyes. "My hopes are simple, my queen, that New Valyria will not repeat the errors of the old, that the greatness of our heritage will be restored without its cruelty." "Greatness," she said, "such a dangerous word, can mean so many things. For some of your forebears it meant dominion, for others knowledge, for still others the freedom to make horrors and call them marvels." "You speak as if you are not of that blood," he said carefully. "I am of that blood," she said, "and that is precisely why I do not trust it." She stepped closer. "When you first came to my court, do you remember what you said?" Orion's gaze dropped briefly. "I said that the old blood would kneel to no one," he said, "that we might stand beside you, but not under you. And I told you that you would either kneel or leave," she said. "You chose to stay." "I chose to recognize that the world had changed," he said, "that our pride in our lineage did not build walls or fill cisterns. And yet," she said, "I still see that pride in the way you look east and west. You think of yourself as heir to something that was shattered before your grandparents' were born. You resent that I dare to remake it in forms you do not fully recognize. You worry that I will squander what remains." Orion's jaw tightened. "I worry," he said slowly, "that you will pour our strength into causes that are not ours, and leave us weakened when our enemies come. Volantis, Cohor, Pentos, they all watch you with envy and fear. Bravo smiles, but it counts its coins. You are strong now, but not invincible. And Westeros is not your concern," she said. "It is a land that hunted our kind to near extinction," he said bluntly. "Those with our hair and eyes, those with dragons. They broke our house. Why should we rush to their aid now? Because they are people, not abstractions," she thought. "Because the world does not arrange its disasters to spare those we dislike." But she did not say those first. "Once," she said instead, "I asked the same question about the people of Meereen. Why should I bleed for them, when they would not have spat on me to put out a fire, when their masters would have bought and sold me without blinking? I learned that the answer is not about what they deserve, but about who I choose to be." "You chose to be merciful," Orion said, "and your mercy nearly destroyed you. The sons of the Harpy bled you in your own streets. And I chose not to burn the city to ash," she replied. "I chose to stay and fix what I had broken in my haste. I chose to learn that there is a difference between justice and vengeance, and that sometimes justice must come slowly if it is to last. I am not asking you to approve of every choice I have made. I am asking you to see that I do not make them lightly." Orion's gaze searched her face. "You are also asking me," he said cautiously, "to accept that you might drag Valyria into another land's apocalypse. If the wall's cracking is as he describes," she said, "then it is not another land's alone. If the bedrock shifts, all walls feel it. New Valyria sits on the scar of the old doom. If something stirs there, do you think it will ignore the place where it last broke the world?" His silence was answer enough. "We stand on a fault line," she said quietly. "We have built our homes and forges and dreams on it. I will not pretend I do not feel it rumble. I did not come here to build a city that will fall into a hole while I argue about whose hole it is." Orion's hands tightened on the arms of his chair, knuckles whitening. For a moment, he looked less like a polished noble and more like a man whose ancestors had fled in the night with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a few stolen heirlooms. "My great-grandfather," he said slowly, "died at sea. He was a boy when their ship left the smoking sea. He used to tell my grandfather of screams in the night, of waves that boiled, of lights under the water that were not fish. His father told him they were ghosts of the freehold's arrogance." He raised his gaze. I did not come here because I thought we could make Valyria as it was. I came because I could not bear to die knowing no one had tried to make it into what it should have been. That, Daenerys said softly, is why I have not yet thrown you into those same boiling waves, despite your habit of arguing with me in public. A startled huff of something that might have been a laugh escaped him. You may not trust me, she went on. You may fear I will pour our strength out like water. That is your right. But I would rather you stand beside me and say such things to my face than whisper them in corners. I will send you to Volantis because they know your name and because you understand what it means to have a history that weighs on your back. You will tell them that we are not a threat if they do not make us one. And you will tell them that if the world begins to crack, they will need friends who live on the fault lines, not enemies. Orien swallowed. You trust me with this, he said, when I have just confessed my doubts. I trust that you love Valyria as much as I do, she said, and that you understand that love is not hoarding. It is sometimes opening your gates. He rose and bowed, deeper than his first greeting. Then I will go, he said, not as a supplicant, but as one who bears witness. That is all I ask, she said. When he had gone, she let herself sag briefly against the rough wall, feeling the unfinished carvings press into her back. The conversation had gone better than she'd feared, worse than she'd hoped. That seemed to be the way with most things these days. By midday, the plans for the envoy had begun to take on the shape of reality. Shipwrights in the lower harbor unfurled blueprints and argued over hull shapes. The Braavosi envoy, Tormo Saladar, puffed himself up and insisted on overseeing the hiring of captains well-versed in Westerosi currents, which Daenerys suspected was his way of ensuring his city's trade interests were represented. She let him with limits. Magisters were like crows, easier to guide if you let them carry some shiny things in their beaks. Grey Worm selected his 50 with brisk efficiency, calling names from among the ranks of Unsullied who had proved themselves both deadly and calm under provocation. Men whose discipline was not simply fear. She watched some of the chosen stand straighter, pride lighting their faces. Others looked as if they had been told to march into a storm and smiled because storms were all they knew. At one point, as she walked along a terrace overlooking the barracks courtyard, she saw one of the selected men, young, barely more than a boy, turn to the small group of friends who had gathered around him. His face shone. I will see the world's end, he said in halting common tongue, as if tasting the words. I will see the wall of ice the Queen's stories speak of. He had never heard her tell those stories directly. Someone else had passed them along. Stories had a way of growing legs. And what if you fall off it? One of his friends asked, teasing. Then I will watch it from below, the boy said. Either way, I will see. Daenerys smiled despite herself and moved on. In the afternoon, she met with the High Flamekeeper. His chambers lay close to the vents, where heat from the dragon forges rose most strongly. The air there shimmered, making the edges of things wavering. Braziers lined the walls, each filled with coals that burned without consuming, lit from the ever-burning 12 fires that gave his order its name. Rubies gleamed in niches, catching and refracting the light. The priest himself knelt before one of the larger braziers, his head bowed, lips moving soundlessly. When she entered, he finished whatever prayer or listening he was engaged in and rose with a rustle of robes. Your Grace, he said, sweating lightly beneath his iron circlet. The flames spoke of your coming. Do they ever fail to anticipate me? She asked. Sometimes they grow quiet, he said. Those are the days that worry me. He gestured to a low stone bench. She sat. The heat was intense, but she had known worse. He took the bench opposite, folding his hands. You know why I've come, she said. To speak of emissaries, he said, and of whether the fires may help or hinder your path. She studied him. He had been a minor priest in Volantis once, part of the cult that had proclaimed her Azor Ahai reborn. He had come east with others when she turned her dragons toward Valyria, trading one set of prophets' arrogance for another. She had watched him change over the years, his certainty tempered by living in a place where fire could destroy careless worshippers as easily as enemies. "You would have gone yourself," she said. "If I asked it." "Yes," he said simply. "And you think the flames would protect you," she said. He tilted his head. "I think the flames would speak more clearly where the cold bites harder," he said. "Fire likes contrast, but I do not think they would shield me from every arrow or frostbite. The Lord of Light is not a nursemaid." "That may be the most sensible thing I have heard a red priest say," she said. "We are not all as dramatic as some you have known," he said, perhaps thinking of another priestess with burning eyes who had once walked in her orbit. She let that pass. "I will send one of your number with the envoy," she said. "But not you. Your place is here, where the dragon forges must be tended and the vents watched. I need someone with strong faith and a stronger sense of when to keep his mouth shut." "Ah," he said, "the rarer kind of priest. Does your order have such a man or woman?" she asked. He considered. "There is Morel," he said. "She was a forge girl once in Qohor. She knows steel and heat, and she has seen what happens when men use fire without respect. She listens more than she speaks. The flames have liked her since she came here. They show her things without much need for blood or spectacle." "Morel," Daenerys repeated. "Bring her to me before sunset. I will judge for myself." "She will be honored," he said. "And you?" she asked. "What do your fires say of this path? Of Jon Snow? Of Westeros?" He turned his head slightly, looking past her into the nearest brazier. The coals shifted, as if stirred by a breath. "They show me cracks," he said. "Lines in ice that glow faintly red, as if something beneath presses upward. They show me a sword breaking. They show me a dragon flying over a wall not made for it." "Is the dragon mine?" she asked. He shook his head. "The flames do not care much for names," he said. "They care for heat and motion. They show me impressions. Shadows. I have seen you standing on a shore of black sand, watching a fleet sail away. I have seen you in halls of stone that are not these, where men in furs argue in low voices. I have seen fire and snow together, not consuming each other, but uneasily side by side. Prophecies, she thought, weary, always more riddles. The last time I listened too closely to those who spoke of what the flames saw," she said. "People died in ways they should not have. And the last time you ignored what they showed you, you nearly died yourself," he said. "Balance your grace. Use the fires as one tool among many. Do not let them be your master, but do not pretend they are only smoke. You counsel moderation," she said, "from a faith that has burned people alive to see visions. We stand on a land that burns men alive if they misstep," he said. "We have learned, or some of us have." He spread his hands. "Send your envoy. Let me send Morel with them. If the flames whisper more clearly in the north, she will hear. If they lie, perhaps the cold will silence them." She rose. "Very well." As the day wore on, the plans wove themselves tighter. By evening, Daenerys' mind buzzed with names and timetables, like a loom loaded with too many threads. She found herself snapping at a servant who spilled water, then immediately apologized, recognizing the edge in her voice. Dusk found her again on the balcony as the envoy's shape grew more solid in her mind. Missandei and Tyrion, 50 unsullied, Morel, a builder Mazdan had chosen. A wiry woman named Hara who could look at a wall and tell you where it would crack. A handful of scribes and interpreters. 2 ships from Bravos, 1 from New Valyria's own fledgling fleet. The sun slid toward the horizon, bleeding red through the haze. She rested her elbows on the parapet, letting the stone press into her forearms. Below, Drogon's shadows swept over the city as they came in to roost. One of the younger dragons, green-scaled, quick as a thrown knife, alighted on a neighboring ledge, folding her wings with practiced grace. "Riella," Daenerys called. The dragon turned her head, gold eyes blinking slowly. Daenerys had named her for a mother she barely remembered, a woman whose face was mostly a story. Drogon had come first, his name a blend of dragon and brother both. The other two had been born later in other fires. Not the same as in the life she might have had. The world liked echoes. Riella snorted, a thin streamer of smoke coiling from her nostrils. "You will stay," Daenerys said. "All of you. I will not risk you over waters I do not yet understand." The dragon's gaze slid past her, toward the west, as if some instinct prickled. The tips of her wings twitched. "You, at least, don't care about walls or crowns," Daenerys murmured. "Only sky. Talking to your children again?" Tyrion's voice drifted from the doorway. She did not turn. Who else listens without interruption? He came to stand beside her, his shorter frame just visible at the edge of her vision. He carried no cup this time, only a small leather-bound book tucked under one arm. "I had a thought," he said. "Dangerous," she replied automatically. "Should I call the guards?" "Only if they can protect you from my metaphors," he said. "I was thinking about wheels." She glanced at him. His face was lit from below by the city's glow, making the lines around his eyes deeper, his expression more carved. "You told me once," he said, "that you wanted to break the wheel that crushed nobles and small folk alike. I have been wondering if perhaps you did, in some ways. You stepped off it. You did not sail west to spin it in your favor. You came here instead and started building something else. A new wheel, perhaps, or something with fewer spokes. You think I succeeded?" she asked. "I think you changed the shape of the game," he said. "Whether you broke it entirely remains to be seen. Men are very inventive when it comes to constructing new ways to trample each other." "That is a gloomy thought," she said. "It is an honest one," he replied. "But my point is this. If what Jon Snow writes is true, then the wheel itself, the world's bones, as he puts it, may be cracking. If that happens, wheels, thrones, crowns, they all become decorations on sinking ships. Even the game's rules change. Pieces that never met before are suddenly clinging to the same driftwood. You and Jon. Dragons and ice things. Valyria and the wall. And you have decided this delights you as a gambler," she said. "It alarms me as a man who has seen too much chaos already," he said. "But it intrigues me as someone who once believed the game itself was unbreakable. If the board is changing, perhaps the only ones who have a chance of steering that change are those who have already refused to play by its old rules. That is you. That may be Jon, if his letters are any indication." "You're saying we are both broken pieces," she said. "I am saying you are both exceptions," he replied. "Outliers. People who have walked away from thrones that were within reach. There are not many of you. The world would have less chance if you both stayed behind your own walls." Sage. He watched the sun kiss the sea, flattening into an orange line. "You want to go," she said quietly. "Not only because you feel guilty or restless, because you are curious." "Yes," he admitted, "because I would like to see if some of the ghosts that haunt me wore different faces there. Because I would like to spit in the general direction of my family's legacy one more time. Because I want to see Jon Snow's expression when he realizes that in some other path, he drove a sword through your heart and then spent the rest of his life paying for it." She turned to stare at him. "You believe that?" He met her gaze. "The House of the Undying showed you a burned throne room," he said softly. "They showed you a city in ash. They showed you a path you could have walked if you had kept listening to men who told you you were destiny and not a woman. I was there too in that story. I know my part. If there is another world where all that came to pass, then Jon Snow had a part as well. Men like him always do. You speak as if the other world is as real as this," she said. "I speak as if choices have weight even when we do not make them," he said. "There is a version of me who never sailed east, who stayed and drank himself to death in some brothel, or was torn apart by one of Cersei's pet monsters. I do not live his consequences, but I feel him at my back sometimes, whispering what he would have done differently. Perhaps Jon feels the same." The idea made her dizzy, like standing on a high ledge and looking down too long. "I cannot carry the guilt of a life I did not live," she said. "No," he said softly. "You should not. but you may be able to carry some of its lessons. That is all I mean. If you see the shape of a tragedy you avoided, you are better armed to avoid its echoes. She looked back at the sea. The last sliver of sun slid out of sight, leaving the horizon a smear of gold that quickly dulled. I do not want my choices now to be an apology for ones I never made, she said. I want them to stand on their own. Then let them, he said. Answered Jon Snow, not because some ghost of you hurt him, but because this world may hurt many if you ignore him. Go through us. Not because you feel you owe Westeros, but because you want to build a world where no one faces cracks alone. She was quiet for a long moment. Write that down, she said finally. Not in the letter to Jon, in your book, so that when I am old and forget why I did any of this, someone can remind me. He tapped the leather-bound volume under his arm. Already half begun, my queen. History will need footnotes, and someone must write them from the side of the dragons. Make sure you are kind, she said. I will be honest, he replied. That is the best kindness I know. The first stars brightened. Drogon shifted below, lifting his head to scent the air. Somewhere in the harbor, a horn blew, long and low, signaling the night watch's change. Tomorrow, Daenerys said, we tell the city, they will need to see you and Missandei and the Unsullied Chosen to understand this is not a rumor. They will make songs about it. They always do. Yes, Tyrion said. Let us hope they are not funeral songs. Always the optimist, she murmured. My optimism and my cynicism share a bed, he said. They get along better than you'd think. She smiled, faint and real, and let the night settle around them. The plans were in motion now. Ships would be loaded, letters sealed, armor polished. Men and women would lie awake imagining ice walls and northern skies. Jon Snow would, eventually, receive a raven bearing her words, if storms and knives and mischance did not intervene. And she, Daenerys Targaryen, would stand on her balcony at the edge of a reborn Valyria and watch the path of her life fork again. One branch reaching toward a shore she had never set foot on, the other sinking its roots deeper into black stone. The world felt very wide and very fragile. She laid her hand on the parapet and felt, through the stone, the faint hum of the dragon forges far below, like a slow, deep heartbeat. The city pulsed around her with heat and labor and hope. Hold, she whispered, to Valyria, to herself, to the cracking world. Hold until we can mend you. The wind off the smoking sea stirred her hair, carrying with it the faintest hint of something colder, sharper, as if from a land where snow still lay deep. Touched her cheek and was gone. She did not flinch.